War rarely offers the courtesy of firm ground. In the first chaotic months of conflict, as Europe's roads dissolved under wheels and weather, Germany reached for a machine oddly poised between elegance and necessity, the Krupp Protze. Its six-wheeled stance threaded soft earth and broken verges with a confidence bordering on arrogance, the sort of vehicle that looked as if it would ask infantry to keep up. Yet, beneath its sharp lines, lay a delicate balance of weight, traction, and ambition. Follow it long enough, and you find a quiet truth. Engineering always reveals its intentions. In the uneasy calm of the early 1930s, when Europe was outwardly recovering but quietly reshaping its impulses, Germany faced a conundrum that would shape its military posture: how to move men, guns and materiel with a speed the old world had never quite attempted. The Reichswehr, constrained yet ambitious, understood that strategy was no longer defined by the number of boots on the ground, but by how quickly those boots could be carried across it. The age of slow convoys and horse-drawn batteries was dissolving. Mobility, not mass, became the currency of relevance. It was here, against the slow decay of old doctrines, that the requirement emerged for a new kind of light truck, something that could bridge the gap between motorcycle reconnaissance and heavy motor transport. Germany needed a vehicle that could dance along poor roads as easily as it could haul an artillery piece. It had to be light enough for disciplined manoeuvre, yet sturdy enough to withstand the bruising rhythm of long marches. And above all, it had to work within a nation, rebuilding its industrial muscle under the watch of suspicious neighbours. The early motor pool of the Reichswehr was a hodgepodge of commercial chassis, experimental conversions, and fragile prototypes that wilted in field trials. What planners soon learned was that the German landscape, from sodden fields to forest tracks, punished anything that relied purely on weight or brute torque. Germany needed an engineering solution rather than an improvisation. That requirement, austere and precise, became the soil from which the Protze's lineage grew. Technically, the call was defined by three pressures. The first was traction. Any vehicle designed for the new mobile divisions had to deliver power across poor surfaces without sinking or stalling. The second was range. Germany anticipated operations where fuel lines lagged behind manoeuvre units, meaning every litre had to count. The third was modularity, a single chassis that could be fitted for infantry transport, artillery towing, engineer support, or light communications roles. That level of adaptability required an entirely new mechanical philosophy, rather than a reworked civilian frame. By the middle of the decade, Krupp, already experienced with compact engines and unconventional layouts, was uniquely positioned to respond. They embraced an arrangement that defied the heavy-nosed trucks of other armies. By pushing the engine forward and designing a narrow bonnet flanked by seating, the engineers created a compact footprint that distributed weight with almost architectural deliberation. It was a move that puzzled some traditionalists, but delighted those who recognized how balance could matter more than bulk. The political climate only sharpened the urgency. The Luftwaffe's expansion, the introduction of motorized infantry concepts, and the covert mechanization programs under various covers all demanded reliable light trucks. A nation preparing for strategic mobility needed thousands, not dozens. The early tests of competing designs revealed brutal truths. Most vehicles either overheated, wallowed in mud, or consumed fuel at a rate that mocked the Reich's limited petroleum supply. Krupp's design offered a promise: a six-wheeled, low-profile machine with a carefully weighted chassis, independent suspension, and a compact engine that behaved more like a precision instrument than a lump of cast metal. And in an era when propaganda liked to hint at limitless capability, the sober engineers in Essen quietly refined something that could actually deliver. Yet, even here, ambitions outpaced realities. The army wanted a truck that could glide over mud and stones while towing a 3.7 centimetre paquet gun, an expectation rather like asking a terrier to drag a piano across a ploughed field. But if the requirements bordered on optimistic, they at least forced Krupp to invent with purpose. So the Protze was conceived not as an answer to a single problem, but as a compromise forged between doctrine, terrain, and industrial rebirth. It arose because Germany needed speed where there was none, flexibility where roads were few, and reliability where political aspirations exceeded the capacities of existing machines. From that tension, creation, fighting the slow decay of inherited ideas, the need became undeniable. If one listens closely to the engineering debates of mid-1930s Germany, echoes caught in the corridors of the Heereswaffenamt, one hears a conviction forming long before the first Krupp Protze rolled out of Essen. It is the conviction that mobility, when properly understood, is not merely the ability to move, but the ability to move with purpose. The army was shifting away from the lumbering assumptions of the previous war, seeking instead a doctrine where speed joined discipline as an instrument of strategy. Krupp's engineers recognized that the army's request was less a specification and more a philosophy. Build a vehicle that does not collapse under duty, that does not demand perfect roads, that does not squander fuel, and that can shape itself to the needs of its unit. The Protze had to exist within a system of movement, rather than as an isolated machine. That realization colored every decision made during the prototype phase. At the heart of the vision was an embrace of weight distribution that broke from convention. Most light trucks of the era suffered from rear axle overload when tasked with towing, giving them a tendency to fishtail or dig themselves into poor ground. Krupp countered this through a novel front-engine forward cabin configuration that pushed more mass toward the front axle. By doing so, they allowed the rear bogie, two axles in tandem, to operate with improved traction, transforming the vehicle's grip on mud and soft surfaces. It wasn't glamour, it was geometry. Another pillar of the conceptual design was the engine philosophy. Instead of seeking brute horsepower, Krupp aimed for an engine with smooth torque delivery and predictable thermal behavior. The M304 four-cylinder unit, modest by commercial standards, was chosen for durability and fuel discipline rather than raw output. To doctrinal thinkers, this made perfect sense. A machine that could be repaired anywhere by a corporal with a toolkit and an instruction sheet would serve the Reich far better than one relying on specialist intervention. It was engineering for endurance rather than spectacle. A third guiding idea was modularity, an aspect often overlooked in popular histories. The Protze was not a single vehicle, but a family built on a shared chassis. The KFZ-69 artillery tractor, the KFZ-70 personnel carrier, and several specialized command and signals variants all sprouted from the same mechanical skeleton. This reflected a doctrine of flexible, interchangeable support assets, units where logistics could be harmonized, where spare parts did not need to arrive in grand theatrical assortments. The chassis became a quiet unifier of the motorized forces. Throughout development, subtle trade-offs were recorded in notebooks and engineering logs. The balance between suspension travel and structural stiffness, the compromise between low profile and cooling airflow, the tension between towing capacity and road speed. None were glamorous constraints, but they illustrate the simple truth that designers were building for a military that demanded reliability at pace. And in that pursuit, small decisions mattered as much as grand ones. As the prototypes evolved, the vision sharpened. This vehicle had to be intuitive for young drivers, predictable under load, and economical on the March A truck that found its footing not through heavy armour, but through elegant mechanical logic. It was, in essence, the machine equivalent of a well-trained orderly, steady, adaptable, and always ready for the next task, though admittedly with the charm of a toolbox wearing a radiator grille. What emerged from these months of refinement was not a perfect machine, but a decisive one, a technical statement reflecting a military imagination that valued coherence over chaos. The Protze would never dominate headlines, but in the quiet interplay of doctrine, terrain, and engineering intention, its vision was unmistakably clear. The Protze was built not as a statement of industrial bravado, but as the outcome of deliberate, almost austere craftsmanship. At the Krupp works in Essen, its construction followed a rhythm that engineers still recognize decades later. Frame first, axles next, drivetrain third, bodywork last. A simple order, a dependable order, the kind of order that turns a concept into a lineage. The chassis formed the spine of the vehicle, pressed steel, boxed for rigidity, lightened only where analysis allowed. No extravagant reinforcements, no speculative additions. Each weld was a commitment to durability. You can almost hear it, the sharp crackle, the brief flare, the cooling hiss. Every seam mattered because every seam travelled to the front. Suspension followed, independent at the front, twin live axles at the rear. A compromise, but a clever one. The front arrangement gave the steering an agility foreign to most military trucks of its class, allowing the wheels to articulate over obstacles rather than crash through them. The rear bogie, 2 axles in tandem, handled towing loads with a steadiness that surprised even some skeptical evaluators. Components were forged, machined, heat-treated, weight trimmed precisely, tolerances checked against gauges that had their own maintenance logs. Then came the engine, the 2.0-litre M304, 4 cylinders, side valves, modest power, reliable torque. It was mounted forward to shift mass toward the leading axle, improving bite on poor terrain. The block was cast with tight grain structure to minimize heat distortion, an attention to detail more typical of passenger cars than military vehicles. Mechanics appreciated its accessibility. Fuel pump visible, distributor reachable, cooling system simple. No sorcery, just thoughtful placement. The gearbox and transfer system were installed as a pair. 5 forward gears. A design pitched between civilian familiarity and military necessity. The linkage was known to be firm, occasionally stiff in winter, but mechanically honest. Drive shafts followed the length of the vehicle, their joints aligned carefully to reduce vibration. A Protze with misaligned shafts announced itself with a telltale hum. A properly built one whispered. Bodywork assembly came last. Sheet metal formed into angular panels, timber slats for seating, steel arches to support canvas coverings. Every component served a purpose, and none pretended to be anything more. The body was bolted, not welded, onto the frame, an intentional decision to allow rapid field replacement. A damaged Protze did not require an artist. It required a wrench. Electrics were minimal, a 6-volt system. Wiring loomed plainly, color-coded modestly. No unnecessary circuits, no frivolous fittings. The philosophy was brutally simple. If it doesn't help the vehicle move, remove it. And throughout this process, quality checks punctuated progress like metronome beats, steering articulation angles measured, brake shoe clearances adjusted, fuel mixture settings tested, cooling efficiency surveyed under controlled load. This was not a vehicle assembled by guesswork, but by repetition, calibration, and discipline. Yet even here, imperfection lurked. Rear tires wore faster under heavy towing. The engine demanded respect in summer heat. Spare wheel placement was a compromise. But such flaws were accepted with a shrug. They were the price of a machine built to serve multiple masters. The final product was not beautiful, but it was coherent. Every bolt told the same story. Every panel served the same logic. It was a machine designed for work, pressure, and movement, like a civil servant who keeps the country running while everyone else argues about policy. And so, by the time it left the factory floor, the Krupp Protze was less an object and more an instrument, built by hands that understood how war bends machines and how machines must resist. The first field tests of the Krupp Protze were less a demonstration and more an interrogation. Officers and engineers gathered around it, not with admiration, but with clipboards. The question was simple. Does this machine do what we insist it must? The answers emerged not through speeches but through sound. Engine pulse, tyre churn, the brittle clatter of equipment shifting across wooden benches. Mud was the first examiner. Germany's training grounds, never famous for kindness, offered a proving surface thick enough to challenge much heavier lorries. Observers noted how the front wheels cut decisively while the tandem rear axles followed in disciplined rhythm. No fishtailing, no sudden bogging. The Protze advanced with a pace that surprised even its advocates. Data logged, traction stable, torque delivery linear, driver corrective inputs minimal. Then came gradients, a series of inclines calibrated to expose weak gearing or poor torque curves. The M304 engine, modest though it was, climbed with a steady drone. No surges, no hunting for gears. Test officers recorded coolant temperature stability within acceptable parameters, even under extended incline runs. The vehicle did not impress through power, but through predictability, an attribute prized by commanders who preferred their machines not to generate surprises. Load trials followed, ammunition crates, personnel weight, the towing of the 3.7 centimeter Paquet gun. Here, the Protze revealed limitations. Under maximum towing mass on soft ground, the rear bogie occasionally dug in, momentarily arresting forward motion. A problem? Yes. A failure? No. Engineers classified the issue as surface-dependent traction variance, a polite phrase meaning mud was mud. They recommended tyre adjustments and revised tow bar angles. The testing resumed. On flat roads, the Protze achieved its rated marching speeds without undue strain. Noise levels were logged, moderate at idle, sharp at high RPM, with vibration rising notably past 3,000 revolutions. Drivers commented that prolonged stretches at high speed created fatigue, though the steering behaviour remained composed. In crosswind simulations, the light body flexed slightly but stayed obedient to driver commands. Brake tests introduced the first real concerns. Under repeated stops at speed, fade became noticeable. Drum temperatures climbed. Stopping distance extended. Officers highlighted this emphatically. The Protze was never intended to be a fast vehicle, but it needed reliable deceleration under load. Krupp engineers responded with revised linings and minor adjustments to leverage ratios. Improvement followed, though never to perfection. Reliability trials were the longest. 40, then 80, then 100 kilometers of mixed terrain. No catastrophic failures recorded. Minor issues: a valve cover weeping oil, a misaligned throttle linkage, a loose mud guard mount. The sort of things a field workshop could address in minutes. That, in its own way, was the real success. A vehicle that could fail safely was inherently more valuable than one that failed spectacularly. Operators were invited to give candid feedback. They liked the visibility. They liked the predictable climb behaviour. They disliked the stiff winter gear changes and the tendency of the rear seats to rattle like cutlery in a drawer. Their greatest praise was reserved for the steering, which many described as unusually cooperative for a military truck. One driver added that the Protze turns like it knows where it's going, which, in fairness, is more than can be said of some officers. In the final assessment, the tests produced neither triumph nor disaster. Instead, they revealed a machine that met its requirements through restraint rather than flamboyance. The Protze proved itself not a miracle of engineering, but a disciplined one, capable where it needed to be, steady where steadiness mattered, and honest about its limitations. The turning point for the Krupp Protze did not occur on a single battlefield, nor did it emerge from a triumphant test report. It came in the months after mobilization, when Germany began to measure its ambitions against the realities of movement. As the Wehrmacht advanced through Poland and later into France, it became apparent that mobility was not an abstract virtue, but the spine of modern warfare. And along that spine, the Protze occupied an unexpectedly central position. Its breakthrough lay in the simple fact that it worked. It started in the cold, it tolerated poor fuel. It absorbed the endless demands of towing anti-tank guns and carrying rifle squads, often in the same march. In an army that prized predictability under pressure, the Protze became a quiet constant, not a star performer, not a problematic liability, but a dependable presence wherever movement was required. This reliability, measured across thousands of kilometers, transformed it from a technical experiment into a doctrinal asset. Yet, almost simultaneously, its failure began to reveal itself. As Germany pushed into harsher theatres, the Protze's modest power and light construction struggled with heavier demands. The Eastern Front in particular mocked any belief that a 1.5-ton truck could be all things to all divisions: mud deeper than its axles, cold that thickened lubricants into wax, and towing requirements that grew heavier with each redesign of Germany's anti-tank equipment exposed the limits of Krupp's earlier optimism. The Wehrmacht recognized the duality early. Reports from field officers demonstrated that while the Protze excelled in manoeuvre warfare, it faltered when the front stabilized and logistics hardened into protracted supply chains. When the enemy no longer retreated quickly enough to free the roads, the Protze's light frame and narrow tires became liabilities. Vehicles bogged down, engines strained, and breakdown rates rose in proportion to the worsening conditions. Still, its operational successes were undeniable. The KFZ 69 variant became synonymous with rapid artillery deployment, towing the 3.7-centimetre PK-36 with a briskness that horse teams could never match. The KFZ-70 moved infantry across vast distances with a coherence that transformed the tempo of early war manoeuvres, and the rarer specialized versions, such as the KFZ-81 light Flak tractor, carried Germany's early air defense guns with admirable efficiency. These were not glamorous duties, but they were essential ones. The Protze's real turning point came when leadership contrasted its performance with heavier incoming trucks like the Opel Blitz. The Blitz could haul more, endure more, and operate across a wider band of conditions. Commanders began reallocating roles accordingly. The Protze, though appreciated, found itself shifted from core logistical arteries to supporting duties, reconnaissance towing tasks, and specific divisional functions where its agility still mattered. Engineers understood what had happened. A vehicle designed for a war of speed had encountered a war of attrition, and in that transition, the strengths of the Protze became limitations. Its lightness, once a virtue, constrained it. Its precision, once admired, made it less forgiving. Its modest engine, once fuel-efficient, became underpowered for the escalating demands. It was not a failure of engineering, but a mismatch between design intent and wartime evolution. Still, the Protze left its mark. Its early war successes validated Germany's mechanized doctrine. Its shortcomings informed the progression toward heavier, more versatile trucks, and its everyday reliability, often unheralded, carried formations further than they expected. The vehicle became a silent teacher to the institutional mind of the Wehrmacht, rather like the colleague who quietly keeps the office functioning while everyone else competes for promotions. Thus, its breakthrough and failure were one and the same, an honest machine meeting an increasingly dishonest war. The hidden consequence of the Krupp Protze lay not on the battlefield, where its performance was counted in kilometers and towed guns, but deep within the industrial and economic structures that supported the German war machine. Every Protze leaving the factory represented a ledger entry: steel consumed, labor allocated, tooling committed. And these decisions shaped Germany's wartime economy in ways not immediately visible to the men who drove them. The first consequence was resource commitment. The Protze's specialized chassis, though efficient in service, required dedicated manufacturing capacity that could not easily be repurposed for heavier vehicles. By choosing a unique six-wheeled configuration and an engine outside the standardization programs pursued by other manufacturers, Germany effectively locked a portion of its industrial network into a design that would later prove difficult to scale. In practice, this meant fewer assembly lines available for multi-purpose trucks at the moment the Reich needed them most. A second consequence lay in fuel economics. The Protze's relatively small engine consumed less petrol per kilometre than larger trucks, a fact that initially pleased planners wary of Germany's limited oil reserves. But as the war stretched into harsher theatres, the very vehicles designed for fuel efficiency were unable to carry heavy loads, forcing larger, thirstier models to take over. What had been a strategic advantage in 1939 became a logistical irony by 1942. The Protze saved fuel only when performing tasks too light to influence the outcome of the wider war. Labour allocation added a third layer of complexity. The construction of the Protze demanded skilled metalworkers for its independent front suspension assemblies and its precise steering gear. Germany's industrial mobilization strategy increasingly relied on unskilled or coerced labour, yet the Protze line resisted simplification. As the war progressed, engineers were pulled to correct quality deviations, workers were trained specifically for Protze components, and factories diverted attention toward maintaining tolerances that no longer matched wartime realities. Precision became a burden. The fourth consequence was doctrinal drag. Early success with the vehicle encouraged the army to expand motorized formations without fully accounting for the limitations of the Protze and other light trucks. Logistics columns grew longer. Fuel distribution widened. Spare parts inventories multiplied. Entire operational plans assumed mobility levels that could not be sustained once heavier artillery, improved anti-tank weapons, and deeper logistical commitments overtook the capacity of light vehicles. The Protze did not cause this overreach, but its early reliability reinforced the illusion that Germany's mechanization was more robust than it truly was. It is here that the memory-forgetting motif emerges. Germany remembered the Protze for what it did in 1939 and 1940, swift marches, coordinated gun movements, tidy logistics, and forgot what it could not do in the grinding attrition of the later war. This selective memory influenced procurement decisions and obscured the need for rapid evolution. By the time the Wehrmacht recognized the mismatch, industrial inertia had set in. There was also a moral dimension, uncomfortable but unavoidable. As Germany increasingly relied on forced labour, the factories producing the Protze became part of a broader system of exploitation. Records from the later war years show labour assignments to associated facilities where workers endured difficult conditions, long hours, and inadequate food. The Protze, a machine designed with thoughtful engineering in peaceful workshops, became entwined with the darker realities of wartime production, not through intent, but through the momentum of a nation's choices. The last consequence was strategic perception. The Protze's presence in early campaigns gave Germany a reputation for seamless mechanization. Foreign observers inflated its numbers, misunderstood its capabilities, and misread its strategic role. In truth, it was a humble light truck that performed admirably within its design limits. But reputations have a way of expanding beyond facts, not unlike the colleague who claims to run the office because they once changed the printer toner. In the end, the hidden consequences of the Protze reveal a common wartime truth. Small machines cast long shadows, not through their size, but through the systems that build, fuel, and believe in them. Legacy begins not with the end of a machine, but with the end of its relevance. For the Krupp Protze, this moment arrived long before the last unit rolled to a stop in the dust of Eastern Europe. Its post-war story is not one of dramatic reinvention, but of gradual disappearance, an echo of earlier mobility captured in a world now defined by heavier trucks, improved roads, and more robust mechanical doctrines. As Germany collapsed in 1945, surviving Protzes were scattered across a continent reshaped by conflict. Some were appropriated by Allied forces, used briefly as runabouts or utility vehicles before being deemed too underpowered or too specialized for meaningful post-war service. Others were swept into the inventories of newly liberated countries, where desperate shortages meant that even a worn-out light tractor had temporary value. These vehicles lived on not as symbols of past doctrines, but as practical objects in an era hungry for transport of any kind. Yet the legacy of the Protze did not rest in its physical survival. Its real imprint lay in the engineering lessons it forced upon Germany. By demonstrating both the advantages and limitations of lightweight motorized vehicles, it influenced the design philosophy that would guide German vehicle development in the post-war decades. Engineers came to value modular systems, predictable handling, ease of maintenance, and balanced weight distribution, concepts that would reappear in Bundeswehr transport vehicles and even West German civilian lorries. In an indirect but meaningful way, the Protze also shaped NATO's understanding of mobility. Analysts reviewing wartime performance noted that light trucks could not, on their own, sustain high-tempo operations once attrition set in. This insight informed the balance between light and heavy support vehicles in the alliance's emerging doctrine. The Protze had proven that agility was valuable, but not at the cost of strategic endurance. Still, the machine's visual profile, its forward cab, its narrow bonnet, its six-wheel stance, became a quiet relic of a transitional era. Too modern for the interwar period, too lightly built for the late war period, it occupied a peculiar middle ground. This made it a curiosity to historians and enthusiasts, but prevented it from achieving the iconic status of larger or more dramatic wartime vehicles. Its legacy also survives through the archives. Mechanical drawings, test reports and production documents held in German and Czech collections continue to inform researchers investigating pre-war industrial planning. These records offer insights into how Germany distributed labour, allocated steel, and balanced budgetary constraints against military ambition. The Protze, modest though it was, became a window into the structure of a nation's armed production. And there is something else, something subtler. The Protze evokes a certain engineering honesty, no flamboyance, no needless ornament, a vehicle that did its job until the job outgrew it. In this, it reflects the broader arc of early war German strategy, bold at the outset, stretched thin by the middle, unsustainable by the end. The Protze was a vessel for this narrative, its mechanical wear mirroring the strategic exhaustion of the institution that built it. Today, surviving examples, few as they are, sit restored in collections, valued for their rarity and their transitional significance. They are not heroic machines, they are not centerpieces. They are artifacts of a problem once solved and later superseded. And in that quiet role, they remain strangely dignified, the engineering equivalent of the retired colleague who still knows exactly where every important document is kept. Thus, the Protze's legacy is not written in monuments or doctrines alone. It is written in the margins, the lessons learned, the shortcomings acknowledged, and the engineering traditions that grew from its existence. In tracing the story of the Krupp Protze from its early promise to its quiet disappearance, one finds a paradox echoed from the cold open. The machine built for movement was ultimately overtaken by the speed of history itself. The Protze did not fail because it was ill-conceived or poorly made. It faded because war, its angles, its appetites, its logistics, changed faster than any single vehicle could adapt. In this, the Protze offers a final reflection. Engineering is as much the art of anticipating change as it is the craft of meeting present needs. Looking back across its service, one sees a machine that embodied resolve in practical form. It carried men toward uncertain horizons, towed guns through mud and frost, and stitched together the threads of early war mobility. Each kilometre travelled reflected a carefully considered balance of weight, fuel, and traction. And yet, these carefully engineered strengths could not shield it from the escalating demands of a conflict that devoured resources, machines, and doctrines without hesitation. The Protze's mechanical honesty becomes, in retrospect, almost philosophical. It reminds us that tools, no matter how refined, are bound by context. A vehicle built for one phase of war cannot be expected to survive unchanged into the next. As soon as heavier artillery emerged, as soon as supply lines deepened, As soon as winter hardened across the east, the Protze's virtues became constraints. Its engine no longer modest, its chassis no longer adequate, its lightness no longer a gift. Strength and limitation forever entwined, and yet the Protze retains a certain dignity. Its lines, angular and deliberate, reflect a moment when engineers believed clarity could outpace chaos. Its layout, forward engine, balanced axles, purposeful simplicity, speaks of minds who understood that logistics would become the modern battlefield. Even in obsolescence, it holds this truth. Thoughtful design leaves echoes long after utility fades. In that sense, the Protze's journey mirrors the trajectory of early mechanized doctrine itself. At first, mobility offered opportunities previously unimaginable. Then it revealed its own vulnerabilities. Finally, it matured into something more complex, more demanding, and far more reliant on machines that could absorb punishment rather than merely avoid it. The Protze sits at the hinge of that transformation, not as a footnote, but as a witness. There is also a human reflection here. The people who built the Protze, engineers, welders, machinists, inspectors, worked within constraints that shaped every bolt and bracket. They solved problems with the tools available, navigated shortages, and delivered a machine that met its moment with quiet competence. Their work reminds us that engineering is rarely heroic. It is often incremental, disciplined, and carried out with little expectation of recognition, rather like the fellow who repairs the office boiler every winter while everyone else debates the heating budget. As we return to the image of that narrow-bonneted truck moving across broken ground, the original paradox resolves. The Protze mattered not because it was exceptional, but because it was reliable in a world that rarely was. It was a bridge between eras, the last breath of interwar light mechanization and the first hint of the heavier logistics chains that would define the conflict's end. And so the thought remains. Machines like the Protze remind us that war reshapes engineering, just as engineering reshapes war. Their legacy lies not in glory or spectacle, but in the simple truth that every turning wheel leaves a mark, even when the road ahead changes beyond recognition.